Hello everyone, my name is Apostate. I am an ex-Muslim and I make videos about my journey out of Islam and critiquing the religion in general. And today's video that we're about to watch together is by a Muslim YouTuber. It's called The Seedy Exmuslim Scam Exposed. As you can imagine, she doesn't speak too favorably of people like me, and she makes a lot of claims that are unkind and untrue. But I am biased. I do have a dog in this fight, so to speak. So I invited a friend of the channel who is not ex-Muslim to lend me an outsider's perspective. I'd like to welcome Drew, otherwise known as Genetically Modified Skeptic.
Hey guys, I'm happy to be here, and yeah, hopefully I can provide that unbiased enough of an outsider's perspective. This is going to be interesting.
You haven't watched this video yet. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the videos that you make.
So I am Drew from Genetically Modified Skeptic, as he said, and I am kind of a skeptic variety channel. I was raised as an independent fundamental Baptist. It's basically fundamentalist Christian, and I deconverted from Christianity when I was about 21. When I was about 23, I started a YouTube channel just to vent my thoughts, and things kind of got out of hand, and now that's my whole career. So lately I've been making a lot of media reviews, talking about LGBT issues. I've made educational videos about theology and philosophy and science and all kinds of stuff. And I've actually made videos about Islam with ex-Muslims several times, but it kind of has been a little while since you and I did our last collab about that Al Jazeera piece that I was in. So I am excited to be a part of this one.
And as I mentioned, you haven't watched this video yet. I wanted it to be a surprise for you because I want to see your organic reaction to it. So without further ado, let's watch the video together.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. If you're watching this video and it's Salah time, please pause it and go pray and come back when you're done. Please check out the description section of this video to support the channel. As you will know if you're a regular viewer on my channel, I've been involved with some unwanted drama with ex-Muslims. I was aware of the ex-Muslim scene but largely ignored it because the majority of the people that form it are either attention seekers or are extremely negative and self-obsessed. This video is not about anybody in particular. It's concentrating more so on the grift that is ex-Muslim social media. And not only that, but what motivates these people to be so public about leaving Islam. And on top of that, why do they feel it's necessary to disrespect Islam and attack Muslims after they leave? And yes, I'm aware there are many deceiving individuals that are just Islamophobes pretending they're ex-Muslims to put Islam down.
Okay, what do you think so far?
What I'm thinking is a lot of the really conservative Christians that I respond to on my channel wish they could say this in an unfiltered way without catching flack from other people. This is really much more harsh than what I would expect to hear from even someone like Frank Turek, who is a Christian apologist who talks about, like atheists and people who deconverted from Christianity. To just say, oh, they're all fake and they're attention seekers and they're toxic individuals and they're even just pretending so that they can have some kind of monetary or social gain. That may be something that the most conservative, evangelical, fundamentalist type Christians think in private, but saying that in an unabashed way, they wouldn't. It sounds like she's really circling the wagons and being like, okay guys, I am going to talk about ex-Muslims, but I just want you to know that this is where I stand. I don't like them. They're awful and terrible, and don't associate me with them. Recognize that I think they're all scam artists and morally deficient.
Well, it's very kind of you to think that she's going to be talking about ex-Muslims, because I have a feeling that the entire video is just going to be this. But are you essentially saying that in your circles, people can't get away with saying something so vitriolic?
Not as easily. I mean, there are smaller creators maybe that would say stuff like this, but if you want to really be in the big leagues of Christian apologetics or like anti-people who deconverted, anti-ex-Christian, you have to have a lot more decorum than this, because people will accuse you. People like me have the power to just accuse someone of circling the wagons and being tribalistic, and that carries enough weight in the Christian community that even Christians can't get away with it. I don't know that ex-Muslims actually have the effect on like Muslim communities that ex-Christians have on Christian communities yet. I hope it gets there, but it's not there yet.
Yeah, I hope so too. And unfortunately, there are no checks and balances on the Muslim community. So you'll hear this kind of rhetoric from the smallest creators to the biggest one, to sheikhs on TV, to your own parents would be saying this kind of stuff. It's the reality that we have to live with. But it's good to be acknowledged, and it's good to know that it's not just us making a big fuss about it. This is outrageous.
Yeah, outrageous is absolutely the word for it, and that is my unbiased opinion.
On the one hand, we have the Quran telling us that there is no compulsion in religion, meaning we cannot force anyone to become Muslim. And on the other hand, we have the Hadith stating capital punishment is in place for those who leave, which is applicable in Sharia-run countries after a proper investigation and after giving the perpetrator the chance to repent. Let's look at a clip of the Muslim lantern as he explains this really well.
When the Quran says there is no compulsion in religion, this is prior to accepting the message. So I cannot compel you to accept Islam. You cannot force someone who is a non-Muslim to enter into Islam. But once someone enters into Islam, there's obligations and responsibilities after making that choice. So what is democracy? Democracy is that the majority choose the ruler, and the rules are applied in the country based on what the majority chose. So if the majority of the Muslims choose a law in their land, if you leave Islam in our country, you will be punished. You will have a capital punishment. Why is that a problem if you believe in democracy? The law of someone leaving his...
Did you catch that? He tried to justify executing people like me using democracy.
Yeah, no, I've actually seen this kind of rhetoric before, and it's I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but it almost seems like it's trying to appeal to Western sensibilities, which are like a bit more influenced by like Enlightenment thinking, by pro-democracy ideas, the American Revolution, French Revolution, that kind of thing. And I don't know that saying, well, if people vote for a horrible, disgusting, immoral law, then it makes it good. Don't Muslims, like many Christians, believe that morality is actually not decided by the people, by a majority, by popularity? It's determined by some kind of transcendent order in the universe. I don't think that you can just say, oh, something is right because it's popular. I'm more utilitarian in my ethics than this guy probably is, and than most Christians are, but still, I don't think that. It's a ridiculous argument. What? No, it doesn't work.
I'd like to add that I don't think there's a concept of democracy in the same way in Islam. So democracy wouldn't matter. Even if all Muslims went out and protested that you shouldn't be killing apostates, it doesn't really matter. It's about what is said in the Quran and in the Hadith. It's about religious law. And did you notice how they were talking about how there is no compulsion in religion, and that is still valid somehow, simultaneously, oxymoronically, but also if you leave, we will murder you.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you can say, oh, there's no compulsion because we can't chemically alter or electrically alter your brain to make you accept this. Sure. But if you were threatening to kill someone, I feel like that counts as compulsion. That's not a stretch at all.
That's not even their argument. To play the devil's advocate, they're saying before you join, there is no compulsion, but once you're in, there absolutely is compulsion.
Yeah, I mean, compulsion to stay in. I have heard people say, you know, there's no compulsion in religion, and not just applying that to making converts or reverts, right? Yeah, keeping people in. And of course, if you are already Muslim and you're doubting, and you're in a situation where people have that legal ability to punish you in that way, then you are being compelled 100%. I mean, we're compelled to obey our laws under any state by some form of punishment, whether that's prison or even execution. Why is it not compulsion if you're in Islam? This doesn't make sense.
And I don't remember opting into anything unless I signed something in my mother's womb. I was a Muslim from the moment I was born, but that's not good reasoning anyway. There shouldn't be any organization where if you opt out of it, they murder you. Cults aren't even that extreme. I mean, no, wait a second. Cults can be that extreme, but what does that say about Islam?
The crazy thing is that I know that some people, having grown up with this idea, would hear you say that and be like, wow, that's so uncharitable. How could you say that? That's so ridiculous. But to my outsider's perspective, having not grown up with this, it's wild. It's so clearly problematic. It's hardly a question.
This is in a video about how ex-Muslims are a scam and they're seedy. They're making our case for us very well.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't make you look like less of a scam yourself when you're saying you use violence to enforce your will or to have some kind of gain, whether that's political or social or whatever.
The law of someone leaving his religion being punished can only be applied in a Sharia state. From an Islamic point of view, as I said, this can only be applied by the leader. Now, the second thing is this: how can I know that someone left his religion? The only way a Muslim or a state can establish that an individual has left the fold of Islam is for that individual to come himself and declare clearly in the public that he left the religion of Islam. So now he's not just leaving Islam, now he is inciting other people to leave Islam as well. Because when he declares something out loud to other individuals, then that thing can become a habit for other people, or an easy thing for other people to also do, because he did it, I can do it too. And then when you have multiple individuals rioting and joining each other, leaving Islam, okay, we're not going to follow Islamic Sharia now because we left Islam. You don't tell me not to drink, you don't tell me not to steal, and you are under a Sharia state, and you will have a group of people who will cause revolution, corruption, and killing and stealing and murdering when they do that.
Where do I even begin? I'll let you go first.
To argue that it's ex-Muslims that are a scam when you are arguing for a political and social and cultural system that says, okay, the biggest problem that we are trying to stamp out is providing any alternative to what we think. If someone is public about not believing, they're not trying to compel anyone else to believe. They don't make any consequences for anyone else. They're just saying, I personally don't, publicly. It's so clear that the system that they're arguing for is designed to stamp out any kind of opposition, so that there's a monopoly on power.
It's very clearly fascist, and it baffles me that this guy is able to say what he's saying wherever he is. Muslims get away with saying stuff like this in countries that are supposed to protect people like me, and it's somewhat considered freedom of speech or religious speech, because what are you objecting to here? Are we objecting to God having said this or the Prophet having said this? Well, you can't tell someone that the religion is wrong. It's within their rights to say that. And that's what's frustrating, is people don't realize that religion is not just all rosy and flowery and beautiful and spiritual. People can come out and say, I would execute you, or sorry, the leader of the country or the crown or the government would execute you. I can't do it. And he's kind of right about something, though. When people look around them and everyone is Muslim, not a single ex-Muslim or atheist, they will feel like there's nobody who leaves their religion. They might feel crazy, or like there's something wrong with them if they have doubts or questions about the religion, or God forbid, if they know that they don't believe in it, they will feel like the only person in that country that thinks that way, and they will be less likely to speak up. They'll be less likely to be themselves, and that's what they want. They're explicitly telling us that we want to silence you, but their rationale is, if you are not silenced, you're going to start going around stealing and killing and murdering, as if that has something to do with your belief, as if countries that aren't Muslim have higher crime rates, for example, which is not necessarily the case. It's a very disingenuous way of framing it, as if they just care about the greater good. That's why they want to execute us.
If you want to make the claim that, apostasy leads to higher crime rates or more violence or something like that, you have to demonstrate that. You can't just say, hypothetically, this is what happens. No, provide some sort of evidence, some kind of study, something like that. There are a lot of different causes for violence and for crime, and being able to reduce all of it down to something like, well, these people don't believe in this religious system, or these people believe in this religious system, that doesn't work. There's so many factors. Things like poverty, it's a huge factor that you should consider. People being totally systemically disenfranchised is something that you should consider. Infrastructure. There's so much. It's not just people being Muslims or not.
But the way that this guy thinks and she thinks, and a lot of Muslims unfortunately think, is that God said, or the Prophet said, that those people will spread corruption in the land, and they run with it. They don't think about it further. And if something about reality does not match what the religious narrative says, reality is wrong. The religious facts are what reality should be.
You definitely see versions of this, in my background, just for this kind of reality is just wrong. Thinking to escalate all the way to the point of advocating for capital punishment of people that disagree with them. You don't quite get that far. With the most extreme Christians, you might. But they're not a majority even in fundamentalist circles in Christianity.
This is what's very tricky when I try to advocate for ex-Muslims and tell people the reality of what it's like to live among Muslims. I'm not trying to fearmonger. I'm not saying that anyone who has a Muslim neighbor is in danger. Previous Muslims like myself are the ones who are in most danger. The average Muslim can like and subscribe and watch this video and leave a comment saying, MashaAllah sister, MashaAllah brother, you proved these scammers wrong, and not think twice about it.
If a person declares that he left Islam, there is a period of repentance. The state brings him and say to him, repent, or you will be punished. And that period can go up to 20 days or can be just 3 days, but not less than 3 days. They will say to him, repent, or you will be punished. So now he has a choice to lie and say, oh yeah, I came back to Islam. In essence, the only way that capital punishment is applied on you in Islam is if you choose to be killed. That's the only way you can be punished Islamically with that punishment of apostasy. If you choose to be killed. Otherwise, you can lie and say, I became a Muslim, and then you will become what we call a munafiq. A munafiq is a hypocrite, someone who shows belief and hides disbelief. And then these people existed at the time of the Prophet Muhammad. They were not punished. Even though the Prophet had a list of all of the hypocrites at his time, he did not punish them because they showed outwardly that they were believers. So in the community, do you show that we are believers, we believe in Allah, we're Muslims? Whatever they hide and they conceal in their heart is a punishment for them in the afterlife and the day of judgment.
First of all, making a decision as to whether or not you believe in Islam or in God or in any spiritual or philosophical system requires so much more time to really sort out than 3 days or 20 days. Like, that's crazy. That's so wild and unrealistic.
Further to that point, if a sheikh today can convert someone back into Islam in 3 days, what the hell was the Prophet doing for years trying to convince people? If the Prophet himself couldn't do it in years, this guy can do it in 3 days. Obviously, it is not meant to actually convince people into coming back. It's like this guy put it, you just lie and don't get killed.
Yeah, and why do they want liars? Why do they want tons of fake Muslims? Ultimately, my guess for why is that they want to maintain political and cultural control. They want to maintain the image of this like perfect Islamic society, even though there's a bunch of people just pretending. But do you really view your religion like so cynically that you want your state or your culture to just be filled with tons of people who are fake?
But to play devil's advocate, you might have a few fake Muslims here and there, or a lot of fake Muslims here and there, but that keeps a lot of other Muslims from questioning. So it's better than a reality where Muslims openly say, I doubt and I don't believe, and then more people end up leaving. So technically, him and I agree that what they're doing is effective at keeping people from leaving. And I hate that he's victim blaming. He says, technically, the only way that capital punishment could be applied to you is if you choose to be killed. That is such a twist.
Yeah, it's totally putting the responsibility for someone's death on the person who's being killed against their own will. I really just don't think that responsibility goes on them. It goes on the person who's like swinging the axe, you know?
Notice how he said you can lie and say that I believe again and become a hypocrite, a munafiq, which is a label given to people who don't believe but pretend to believe. And I used to understand it back when I was a Muslim as people who formed alliances with Muslims under the pretense that they are also Muslims, but it was for their own selfish reasons. That's how I understood it. But this guy is making a case for becoming a munafiq instead of being murdered by the state. So Islam puts you in a position where you either come out openly and get killed, or you're labeled a munafiq and Muslims chant verses about you every day about how shitty of a person you are and how you deserve punishment. There's just no winning.
Yeah, that's absolutely not a good option for you to live a healthy life at that point. So really, you are punished regardless. If you have some sort of change of mind, which I don't think you can ultimately control completely, if you start to change your mind about what you believe about Islam, at that point, it's all downhill. No matter what you choose to tell authorities over you, you are going to be punished either for the rest of your life or your life is going to be ended. This is not a fair system.
And it's also dishonest to say that it's only if you make a fuss about it, that's when you might be punished. Sometimes people kind of sniff it out. Like if you haven't been praying recently, if you've said something that doesn't exactly go with what Islam mandates you say, people will snitch on you. So it's not just simply the activists and the vocal people. A lot of people are dragged out into the spotlight and then punished for it. Or if they say something that's remotely blasphemous, even if they're not necessarily Muslim, they will be treated like a Muslim who's supposed to act Muslim and is not doing so.
Yeah, when people say to me, I don't understand how any of your family found out that you weren't a Christian anymore. You could have just hidden that for the rest of your life. Why did you have to have a coming out with your family? As, you know, a non-believer. I say when you're in this deeply religious culture, it's a part of your everyday life. It's part of your language. It's actually pretty easy for people to detect fakers, liars, hypocrites, whatever. And that's even within my experience of Christianity, where yes, we are praying a lot. We're definitely praying over 5 times a day, but we don't have compulsory prayer times. We don't have any kind of like washing rituals. In my old tradition, we didn't have objects that we had to have. We didn't have any beads. We didn't have any prayer rugs. We actually didn't believe in having any kind of like idols, we kind of called them, no objects associated with our faith. And it was still easy to sniff out the fact that I didn't believe at a certain point, even though I was acting like a Christian the best I could. So I think that's a good point that you've made. People will be able to find out that someone's lying or just trying to fly under the radar when they don't believe anymore.
As you've said, this kind of rhetoric would not be tolerated if it was said by a Christian about atheists in the US, for example. But imagine, to further that example, if I came out and said Muslims in the West, they should be secretive about their religion. They shouldn't be wearing a hijab. They shouldn't have a beard. They shouldn't tell anyone that they're Muslim. Just keep it to yourself. And if you don't, there should be capital punishment that goes on you unless you forcibly denounce your religion. I would never say that, even if I don't think that Islam is true or that it is healthy or productive. I don't believe in forcing people out of their religion or making them live as hypocrites under duress. And I can only imagine the kind of backlash that I would receive for saying something so hateful. So I don't understand how Muslims can be simultaneously a persecuted group that people have to handle with gloves, and at the same time they could say whatever they want and they get away with it.
These systems set up a way by which people can create a cultural and social reality where they are simultaneously victim and persecutor for the sake of control. And yes, I would agree. If you said something like that about Muslims, there's no way I would come onto your channel. Like, I would consider you to be an extremely hateful and bigoted person. But I know that you would never say that because it's terrible.
And I'd like to remind the viewers what the topic of this video is. It's about the seedy ex-Muslim scam exposed. And we're 3.5 minutes in, and all they've said is how to justify our murder. So how dare us object to that?
So as you heard the brother say, if someone becomes an ex-Muslim without making a song and dance about it by announcing it to the world on social media, they can just get on with their lives, even in a Sharia country. But those who choose to make it public when in a Sharia country are violating that country's law, as it is seen as disrespect to sacred faith with the motive to harm others by leading them astray. And as the brother said, the logic behind this is if that person is outside the bounds of what is halal in Islam, they're capable of forbidden things, like lethal violence, rape, theft, etc., all of which is haram for Muslims. Obviously, this law is not applicable in the West, which is evident through the numerous ex-Muslims on social media with massive brands built on constantly demonizing Islam whilst making a living from it. Also, average citizens in a Sharia country can't carry out the punishment for apostasy, as only the authorities in those nations have that power. But even if you are in a non-Sharia country, why do ex-Muslims not just leave Islam quietly and get on with their lives?
So her logic is that if you don't have morality given to you by Islam, or if you don't have a governing law system, which is Sharia, to tell you not to murder people, you are now more capable of murdering people, ignoring the fact that people who proclaim to be believers do commit all of these acts, and sometimes even disproportionately higher than people have thought through their beliefs. But she demonizes us.
Yeah, again, if you're going to say that not believing or believing something has the potential to make you do these horrible acts, you have to demonstrate that. You can't just say, like, hypothetically, this is the case. Show me some kind of study.
You're too skeptical and rational for them. I mean, most of her worldview is not built on data. It's built on God said. And what's crazy here is that in her bio, she says she has a master's degree in psychology. This is an educated person. Yes, I know. This is not just the case of someone who has not gone to school and their whole worldview is just shaped by religion. People like her are immune to science. They go and study in institutions where they're taught to think critically, and they don't learn anything from that. They put their beliefs in a bubble and they put everything else in another bubble. And somehow she is qualified as a psychologist.
That's wild, especially because I have a psychology degree, and I didn't complete my master's in psychology, but I have master's coursework under my belt. And I had the experience of realizing, because of my psychology degree, that certain things within the New Testament that the Apostle Paul wrote about psychology were just not tenable. And so for me, going through my education at a Christian university, by the way, a very conservative Christian university that didn't even teach about evolution, I applied the things that I learned from my textbooks and from reading studies to my own worldview, and that affected my positions on religious matters. I then looked around and saw some people doing the same thing, but a lot of people not doing the same thing. Within Christianity, the thing that you are maybe not reflecting on, psychologically speaking, is like, can people believe that they experienced something wholeheartedly that they actually did not? Could someone claim to have seen the resurrected Jesus without having actually seen it? And they believe in it so much that they're willing to die for it. A lot of Christians say, oh, no, that's not true. But if you do higher level psychology work, you realize actually it happens all the time. You'd be shocked how often people report experiences that they did not ever have. I guess what I'm saying is, in my experience, something psychologically that she's kind of displaying here does happen in Christianity, but not to the point where we're like advocating for killing people because of it.
To add to that, she says that she's a marriage and parenting expert, and she specializes in providing solutions and advice for Western Muslims to have successful relationships and outcomes with their spouses and children in an Islamic context. I struggle to think of how she could help a parent or a family that has a child or a son or a daughter who has issues with religion, because her message is basically, as you're going to see, shun them, because otherwise they would have been murdered.
And that is not going to create the best relationship.
She also says that ex-Muslims in the West do this whole song and dance on social media. They can't do it freely in the Middle East. They can't advocate for themselves. They can't talk about the religion and how it harms people and critique the religion in an academic way even. They're in a lot of danger if they do that in the Middle East, as we've seen time and time again. So their presence in the West is only evidence that they're afforded the freedom in the West to be able to do that. So I don't see how that proves anything. If anything, it proves that their fascist regimes are working.
I take issue with calling it a song and dance in the first place. If you announce or just are open about the fact that you believe or don't believe something, I don't think we have to act like that's big and dramatic. I mean, there have been usually conservative Christian politicians who have argued, oh, like Muslim school teachers cannot, like women cannot wear the hijab because that's grooming children to be Muslim, just appearing as a Muslim. And I think that's a horribly stupid and discriminatory policy to have. We should not have that in the US. Just by appearing in a way that is consistent with your religious beliefs, or speaking in a way that is consistent with your religious beliefs within your own personal life, and you're not trying necessarily to influence someone, that's not a big song and dance. I think that that's a fundamental freedom. Conflating being honest about yourself with being dramatic is exactly what people do to try to demonize Islam within the US.
And is it really dramatic to do a song and dance when these people are calling for your death? I mean, I don't think that's dramatic at all. And to look at her, she's wearing an niqab, she's displaying herself as a Muslim woman, and that could be considered a song and dance in and of itself. But beyond that, her title of her channel has Muslim in it. She talks about everything with an Islamic lens. So how is that not parading her beliefs and openly talking about them? And how is that any different than someone saying, I don't believe this religion, and this religion is planning to harm me if they could?
Well, to play devil's advocate, as you have done a couple of times, let me just ask you a question. Do you know best, or does someone else?
No, Allah knows best. You got me there. I was not expecting that from you, Drew. I can't even have this in the video. This is embarrassing for me. Yeah, no, I'm keeping that. And it bothers me how they always fall back on, well, hey, we can't just murder you on the street. Only the government gets to do that. Because A, it does happen. When you tell someone that this class of people deserves to be punished, they're going to take matters into their own hands. Secondly, that doesn't make it any better. Just to say that you need a court order to do it, or you need paperwork to get it done, that just doesn't absolve you of the moral guilt of it.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on that. My unbiased opinion, again, outsider's perspective, is that this is wild, and I think that you have a completely rational take on this.
But even if you are in a non-Sharia country, why do ex-Muslims not just leave Islam quietly and get on with their lives? Why all the attention-seeking noise? And why the constant hate towards a belief system which billions of people hold dear afterwards? And then when there's pushback when Muslims are offended, these people play the victim. You don't see the majority of Muslim reverts that are ex-Christians do the same thing. And in the rare instances of when reverts do so, it's usually in response to criticism from anti-Muslims that choose to attack the Muslims first. I've seen and heard some ex-Muslims be so anti-Muslim that they shockingly encourage what is happening to innocent people in Palestine, which is absolutely crazy to me. They are so filled with hate that they don't even have empathy for their fellow human beings, just because they happen to be Muslims.
Have you noticed the irony of that? Saying that ex-Muslims don't have empathy for their fellow believer just because of the religion that they follow, or just because of their beliefs.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I have seen the occasional example of someone being like, oh yeah, what's happening in Palestine is fine because of whatever. But I mean, she's also advocating that a very large number of people be essentially genocided. So she obviously thinks killing these people in Gaza is terrible. Yeah, of course it is. I totally agree. And she, the irony is so crazy. It's hard to even wrap my mind around right now.
There are indeed people who take Islam to be the enemy and Muslims to be the enemy, and the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And they have terrible takes because of that. And I personally have openly criticized such people. And I'm sure that she might come across a video like that and dismiss it and say, still, I think that ex-Muslims are all inhumane and they're supporting what's happening in Palestine. No matter what I say or no matter who anyone else says, she has the conclusion that there must be a reason why we deserve to be executed. And she looks for anecdotal data that justifies that. But like you said, it's very ironic that what she said could be applied exactly to her.
They're so filled with hate that they don't even have empathy for their fellow human beings, just because they happen to be ex-Muslims. And then when there's pushback, when ex-Muslims are offended, these people play the victim.
It seems to me that she considers criticism of the Muslim world or of Islam or anything, any kind of dissent from that at all, to be hatred. For me, my motivation in criticizing what she's saying doesn't have to do with me hating her or hating the Muslim world or hating Islam or anything like that. It's more that I want the best quality of life for the maximum number of people. And it seems like she's advocating for literally killing people unfairly. That's all it is. And when you are not in my position, when you are in your position of having been raised in it and now being an ex-Muslim and having to be subject to this, I think it's pretty reasonable and even compassionate for you to say something. It's not hatred at all. You're not a hateful person for speaking up about injustices.
I think her mentality is very black and white. It's very religious mentality. You either love something or you hate it. And I get this objection a lot. People ask me, why do you hate Islam so much? Why do you hate Muhammad so much? And I answer that I don't hate it. And some people get offended by that. Like, how could you not hate such a hateful and scary religion? I think that hate is not productive and it's draining. When it comes to Muhammad, I think he's a figure. I don't think of him as a real person for me to hate. I don't know if he actually knew what he was doing or what was going to happen down the line. So I don't think it's productive to hate him. I hate the things that he's done and the things that have come from his belief system. But I don't even necessarily need to hate them to object to them. I'm a person who's not filled with hate, and I try to point things out as rationally as I could. Hate is never in the equation, but to her, unfortunately, she sees the world as hate and love, black and white, enemies and allies. There's no in between. So she views any criticism of her belief system as hate towards her and 1 point whatever billion people. She probably even calls it Islamophobia, calls it bigotry, and let me remind you that we're talking about a belief system that's just right now, her own words, advocating for murdering me. And me protesting it is the hateful action here. It's victim blaming to the 10th degree. And she dares to say that we started and then we call ourselves victim.
It's a fundamental lack of empathy that I wonder if this lack of empathy has to be programmed into you. I get comments all the time, and I've had comments from people in real life that have said, oh, well, if you truly don't believe in God or in Christianity or whatever, then why do you talk about it so much? They're casting doubt on my sincerity as someone who doesn't believe. It's pretty relevant. Religion is a huge thing all over the world, culturally, economically, socially, in all ways, very influential on tons of people, including people who are not religious. How can you not see from my perspective that I might want to speak about it in some way? Not even always critically, but just want to talk about it. It's wild to me that people cannot get there to understand that on their own. Fundamental lack of empathy that's astonishing.
Which is ironic because she accuses us all of lacking empathy when one of the things that got me out of Islam was empathy, starting with the question of what happens to all those people who don't follow Islam. Forget about ex-Muslims. I didn't know that was even a concept, but people who are born into other religions or irreligious, and no matter how much I try to sell them on my religion, they're not convinced. And I can see why, because there's nothing about my religion that's inherently convincing or inherently true. It's all just making appeals to emotion most of the time, to their fear, to their sense of wonder. And anyone can do that with any other religion. So I felt a sense of empathy for those who would follow the same formula and arrive at the wrong answer and then be tortured forever. And that's one of the things that got me out of the religion. Her, on the other hand, she's advocating for treating us in inhumane ways, calling us all sorts of names with absolutely zero empathy. So I find that ironic. Most of her videos are just reacting to what other popular characters have said. Not all of them are related to the Islam world, but she puts an Islamic twist on it. So she is gaining a lot of attention. She's asking for money, and she's looking at the world from a Muslim lens, and she's not really contributing much productive to the discussion. So if she's accusing people of doing things just for attention and money, I feel like that's projection, if anything.
I'm 100% there with you.
I also noticed a pattern where most ex-Muslims, not all, but most, are normally atheists. However, the people that follow them aren't just atheists or Islamophobes. You have Christian apologists and even Hindus fanning out over this venomous, hateful content. Let's take a look at another short clip of Brother Muhammad Ali speaking about the scam that is ex-Muslim social media, which these fraudsters have been profiting from for decades in some cases.
Today is a business. They make a channel, they claim their ex this, and they start making the whole channel about Islam, and then they make money and they ask people to donate for them. It's a business, basically. That, okay, I left Islam, but support me because I'm persecuted. Why is the reason you left Islam? The people always who come and left Islam and ask them this question, they don't have an answer for it, which for me, unfortunately, is a sign of insincerity. Because if someone pinpoints a problem, I can solve it. But if there is no problem that can be pinpointed, how can you fix something that you cannot even identify?
Don't they have YouTube channels too?
Everything they just said applies to them. They have no marketable skill except, hey, I'm a Muslim and this is my take on so-and-so. And my whole identity on this channel is that I'm a Muslim. And here's the link to donate to me. And yet they dare point at us and say that we're doing it as a scam and a grift. I mean, that's all they do.
People in the Christian world say the same thing about people like me. Not everybody, but there are people that are very vocal about this point. And I'm just like, here's my deal. I don't have a problem with anybody. I don't have a problem with anybody talking about religion and making money from that online at base level. There are ethical and there are unethical ways of doing that from a religious and non-religious perspective. But if we really want to pull on this thread and talk about who is providing nothing, that's just asking for money, that's just doing it to make money and gain support in these things, maybe we should talk about the fact that when you are criticizing something that's status quo, when you're putting yourself at risk, you are usually providing something that is original and that is very genuine. Whereas when it comes to Dawah channels, when it comes to Christian apologetics channels, they're not allowed to say something original. They have to say the same thing other people have said. They cannot create their own content which is entirely original. That's not how it works. They have to cite or rip somebody else off and market it as their content from which they deserve to profit. So I feel like if you really want to play this game and talk about providing a real product or whether it's a scam or whatever, I think that people in glass houses should not throw stones.
And also the formula of risk versus reward for them is really worth it. There's not really much of a risk to be a Muslim person talking about Islam. Sure, you might get a few hateful comments here and there from Christians or critics of Islam or whoever else, even bigots, but you're not really in any real danger. You won't be doxxed at the same rates as ex-Muslims are. No one is going to say you deserve to be executed. Your family's not going to disown you. And if you can read Quran well, or if you can demonize other people well enough, you'll make a lot of money doing it. So if I was a grifter, as many people have pointed out, I'd just be reading Quran on my channel and accepting donations, because that would be a much more peaceful, much more productive way to make money. And I want to remind people that I literally left my job to do this. I still get paid a third of what I used to get paid. I didn't do this out of desperation. It's not because I don't have any marketable skills. As you can tell, I'm somewhat of an intelligent person. I had a very good job, and I chose to do this because I think this is urgent, this is important. And this is a good reminder to ask you people, and I have no shame in this, if you would like to be a supporter, links are in the description, because if I don't do this, if other people like me don't do this, all our representation is going to be people like her and people like him getting paid way more than we are just to spread hateful things about us. So don't forget to support people like me and people like Drew.
I want to point out that the disparity in institutional power between apostates and religious people is really huge. I mean, I'm one of the biggest atheist or skeptic channels that's ever existed at this point. And I make less than most people in my apartment complex. I do fine for myself, but I don't have any big backers. It's a good job for me. I'm not complaining, but there are Christian channels that are a quarter or even a tenth of the size that I am, that are, first of all, able to be nonprofits that don't pay any taxes. And then they're able to get a bunch of a board of trustees that basically ensure the security and continued existence of their channel in perpetuity. So a lot of Christian people that get on the board of trustees for ministries are white Christian men who are multimillionaires. It's just like a fact. That's what happens. And so you have these people that can kind of act as a safety net for you or funnel tons of money into your ministry, into your YouTube channel, whatever it is, without you having really proved yourself as capable of doing very much. You know, for me, it would be insane if I could ever get somebody that gave me like $2,000 a month. That would be insane. But there are Christian channels that get way more money than that barely have my reach. And I think that it's probably going to be pretty similar for some Muslim channels. I mean, you're going to be able to have Muslim communities, especially in Muslim countries, that will be funded by Muslim organizations, by, you know, certain faith communities that are local, whatever. I mean, you tell me, but I would imagine that if they want to make a global outreach like Dawah channel, they can probably get plenty of people to come together and basically crowdfund their efforts. Whereas if there was an apostate anywhere, even in, you know, the US or the UK, there's like no way that they're going to be able to get an actual body of people to come together to permanently support their effort. No way.
No, we have to rely on the individual contributions of people, which we highly, highly appreciate, because I genuinely could not do this without those people, and I'm grateful for them. But it's not the same scale whatsoever. And to her point that she says most of our audience is, I don't remember how she phrased it exactly, but she said they're Christians and Hindus and other haters. It is true that there's a bunch of groups out there who try to hijack our voices as critics of Islam, as ex-Muslims, to say, and this is why my religion is true, and this is why my religion is better. But a lot of us are explicitly vocal about not wanting them in our midst. And that's why my channel has grown so slowly, is I've avoided collaborations with channels that do rely on that sort of voice in their audience. But if I was doing what she's accusing us of doing, I would reach out to one of those groups that you have just mentioned. I would reach out to a church and ask them to covertly fund me as someone who's fighting the good fight. Even if I'm not spreading Christianity, I could get funding from a church just to criticize Islam. But that's not something that I'm doing. Instead, I'm here and asking people for donations. I'm working a part-time job. I'm making ends meet because I genuinely believe in what I'm doing. And also, that other guy, he was saying that most of the time, or all the time, when you ask a Muslim or ex-Muslim why they left Islam, they don't have an answer for you. And that's absolute BS. I mean, we talk about it day and night. We point out so many issues, and sometimes it's things that resonated with us. Sometimes it's things that we noticed after we left. And to each and every one of them, they have apologetics, or they find a way to ignore it. And as he put it, because if you have a problem, I can find an answer for it. So he's not willing to listen to understand why we left. He's willing to listen only far enough to find an excuse for the problem that we found.
What I find a lot of these ex-Muslims and even cultural Muslims that are ashamed of their religion have in common is that they have overinflated egos and a disproportional sense of self-importance, whilst at the same time having low self-esteem. For example, if you respond to one of them after they initially attack you, normally they just fold, or they take it so personally they rant and rave about it forever. I've noticed they also use anti-Muslim stereotypes to generalize any criticism of them as Islamic extremism, or they claim Muslims are brainwashed simply because they practice their religion properly and reject secular mental programming, which is actually actual planned and marketed brainwashing. These ex-Muslims and cultural Muslims act as if they've got it all figured out, but most of these people are fully grown adults that are immature, lost souls. And when I say a middle-aged person should not act like a child, it's not ageist. It's simply saying your life is a mess if you still can't make adult decisions at that ripe age, especially if you're guiding children. It's selfish and irresponsible.
I can see you laughing back there. Yeah, tell me your raw reaction.
In the infantilizing, the constant insult. I mean, this is just like, she's trying to spit bars right now. That's what she's trying to do. This is like insult comedy almost, more than it is making a point. I think that we have responded showing our argumentation. I think especially you have shown your argumentation. I've just kind of been like bewildered over here. But you've given good points and arguments for why what she's saying does kind of seem like Islamic extremism. I don't think that you're a man-child for pointing that out. And to insinuate such is really just to take any of the responsibility off of her for her own statements and place it onto you for your reaction. It's more victim blaming is all it is.
And it's just character assassination. I mean, again, I want to remind the viewers, this is a video about why people like me are scammers and we are full of it. It's really blatant how she's just going for character assassination and nothing really to acknowledge the criticism of her religion.
Yeah. In my experience, in Christian circles, it is pretty common for people to hear that you don't believe and then just immediately start talking about how, oh yeah, well, I've always known that you weren't a good person. And of course, you're too stubborn for this. And most of the time people don't say things quite this grossly as she has, but there's similar characterizations of apostates, basically.
And notice how I don't talk about Muslims or even the Dawah people that way. I don't say that they're saying what they're saying because they're self-absorbed, because they have low self-esteem, because they're terrible people. I have the empathy and the understanding that a lot of their bad beliefs are informed by their understanding of the world from a religious lens, and a lot of it is informed by fear. They are terrorized by their religion into thinking this way, and I give them the benefit of the doubt. But the other way around, she accuses people like me of just spreading hate against people like her and just being too simplistic about things when it's actually nuances on our side, not on theirs.
The reason why people spread these negative characterizations and do these character assassinations on apostates, whether it's in Christianity or in Islam, it's just to protect their in-group. It's to make their in-group look better and to put down their out-group. It's not a logical or rational argument for why they're right. It's just saying, well, they're bad people and we're good people, so you should listen to us. You shouldn't listen to them.
It's a tactic that every cult and every high control group uses. It's not just unique to Islam, but as you can see, it's done so blatantly in the Muslim world and even in the West, among Muslims. And it's unfortunate to see that because I want better for that community, even though I'm not really a part of it anymore. I want people who would like to be a part of it, who have no choice but to be a part of it, to have a better life. And I want a better life for Muslims as well. And what she's saying is victimizing a lot of questioning Muslims and a lot of Muslims who don't think like her. But unfortunately, her position is the more traditionally religious one. So this is bad for Muslims.
I want to speak on the idea that, in secular communities, secular ideas are just as much brainwashing as anything else. You certainly can make an argument for undue influence in secular communities as well. Like it happens in all human communities, undue influence where people are doing something like indoctrination or brainwashing or whatever. But let's just think here for a second. Is undue influence, coercion, indoctrination of children more likely to happen when the children have access to a diversity of information from many different perspectives, like in most, if not basically all, secular communities or secular countries? Or is it more likely to happen when anybody who disagrees with one perspective is murdered? That seems like comparing apples and oranges to me.
And she's one to talk because she probably advocates for teaching kids about religion, making them memorize Quran, praying, all that sort of stuff, which is indoctrination and some might say even brainwashing. I remember you said something earlier about a glass house and throwing stones. Did you say do throw or don't throw? I don't recall.
Do not. No, I know that there are times within Islam to throw stones at the devil. This is not a time to throw stones. You should not be doing it.
Some of the best practicing Muslims are new reverts. They are not brainwashed at all. They've made an informed decision to become Muslim after learning the deen and living it, which is the opposite of the majority of ex-Muslims and cultural Muslims, who may have even read about Islam in detail, but never practiced it properly on a daily basis.
Okay, I gotta jump in right there. So you know how earlier I was saying, oh, why would you want a bunch of liars and hypocrites and fake Muslims? Don't you want genuine Muslims? Yeah, this is why. Like, she's saying, oh, these people who were not brainwashed and genuinely made their own decision in an environment where they had access to all kinds of information, not just Islamic stuff. Those are the best Muslims. Those are the great Muslims. Don't you want more good ones? Don't you want to maximize quality here, not just quantity? I don't get it.
It's ironic that she thinks if someone researches Islam and makes a decision one way, they're a good person. If they make a decision the other way, they're a bad person. She doesn't seem to comprehend or acknowledge that philosophical differences are at the root of why people believe or not believe. Often that is the case. And someone disagreeing with your philosophy on God doesn't mean that they deserve to be tortured. I mean, the same question extended to me in terms of polytheism and monotheism. I was taught that anyone who's a polytheist, who commits shirk, who worships anyone aside from Allah or with Allah, deserves to be tortured forever. And I could never understand that, because that's a matter of philosophical discussion and disagreement. Just because someone can think of polytheism as viable doesn't mean that they deserve to be tortured. And in the same vein, if someone doesn't believe in your particular religion, that doesn't mean that they're any less sensible than someone who joined your religion.
Some of the best practicing Muslims are new reverts.
And notice how she said new reverts. I think that is not intentional, but it's important, because new reverts are usually people with a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of energy, and a new life that they're trying to get themselves situated in. That is a very different energy than someone 10 years down the line or 5 years down the line. I have spoken to so many people who have converted to Islam for one reason or another, and they eventually leave the religion. They don't get counted in the statistics of people who leave or join. They're just paraded around when they first join as someone who is worthy of being praised, as an example of a good human being. As she put it, new reverts are a great example, but old reverts, they usually end up leaving.
Which is the opposite of the majority of ex-Muslims and cultural Muslims, who may have even read about Islam in detail, but never practiced it properly on a daily basis for a prolonged period of time. Normally, people like this have friend groups consisting of only atheists, or just Christian apologists, or solely Hindus, and have never actually had close friends that are real practicing Muslims. And it is in fact them that are brainwashed by the culture of the country they grew up in.
So how does this apply to me? I grew up in Saudi Arabia. I was surrounded by Muslims, and I still have a lot of Muslims in my life that I care about. I've practiced since a younger age than her. I can probably read the Quran better than she can, but she would refuse to acknowledge that a person like me could theoretically exist.
And this is one thing that is not different at all when it comes to Christianity and Islam, especially, like conservative Christianity. I've had a friend who grew up in Iran in a religious family, tell me that I grew up more religious than he did. I grew up in a very conservative fundamentalist community. I was in church 3 to 5 times per week. I'm the first in 4 generations of men in my family not to be a full-time missionary to, make converts of people. And I get told constantly that, I was just never really a true Christian. I never knew anyone who really was Christian or really cared about the faith. And I'm like, if I don't count, who counts? You really don't have space in your ideology for the possibility that people like me exist. And that is just a defensive posture you're taking so that you don't have to question or understand the complexity of the real world.
I said it before and I'll say it again. If a Muslim or a believer in general were to acknowledge the existence of a sincere and honest and well-meaning disbeliever, it would almost have to shatter their belief system. Either they have to reconstruct one with some sort of lovey-dovey version of God that won't send that person to hell, or they go the other way around and refuse to acknowledge that such a person could even hypothetically exist, even if we're talking to them, if we have videos talking about it. This is part of why we do what we do. I want to tell you that we do exist. And how would you know about our existence if everyone around you is coerced into silence? I mean, you're answering the question right there. Why do vocal ex-Muslims exist? Because you keep repeating false accusations and false characterizations of us. And to a certain extent, I don't blame them for being misinformed, but at some point it becomes willful ignorance when we're telling you what we think, how we feel, and how we believe, and you refuse to acknowledge it anyway. And I also wanted to add that I'm not sure if she's aware, but most ex-Muslims are actually from Muslim countries and Muslim communities. That's just by numbers, because most Muslims are in Muslim countries and Muslim communities. So statistically, that's where most ex-Muslims are from. Not to invalidate the existence of ex-Muslims in the West, for example, who grew up in the West, but she's ignoring the majority of the population of ex-Muslims in the world just to make her point.
I don't like using the term coconut, as it can be considered a slur and has been used against me because of my accent and my upbringing in the past, before I became a proper practicing Muslim. But ironically, these Muslims and cultural Muslims are coconuts that are totally unaware they are coconuts, trying to convince people that they are not coconuts.
So I'm not sure if you're aware of what a coconut is. It's hairy and brown on the outside and white on the inside. So it's a derogatory term for a brownish person who's not acting brown enough or is acting too white. And it's ironic that she says, I don't like to use this term because it's been used against me, but I'm going to use this term now that I no longer qualify as a coconut.
I don't like using the term coconut. It has been used against me before I became a proper practicing Muslim.
She's not against the term itself. She's glad that she's no longer a coconut.
Imagine that you come visit me in Texas and we're hanging out and a friend comes in and says, you know, Aladdin, why I like you is because you're a coconut. Like, you're brown on the outside, but you're white on the inside. And that's good. Wouldn't that be horrendously racist?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is just like straight up racism, right? Like,
she means to say that it's because you lost the connection with the motherland, you know, or wherever it is that you're actually from, because you're not from the country that you're in right now and you don't belong in that country. She's trying to instill that sense of otherness in you and making you insular, you know, so that you have to belong to the Muslim community in the country that you're in. You can never assimilate. You can never have traits that are common to the white people around you. And it causes a lot of identity issues for a lot of people. I grew up in the Middle East. I don't feel like a coconut because I was already a fully grown, hairy, brown on the outside and inside kind of person. But when I moved outside of the Middle East, I struggled with my identity because I don't feel like I fit in here. I don't feel like I fit in there. And that's not because I left Islam. I struggled with my identity even when I was among Muslims. And she's just exacerbating that for people, shaming them for it, and making it seem as if you're not Muslim enough because you aren't keeping up with your race. It's disgusting.
It's odd to me to say that, yes, while certain, you know, races and nationalities of people tend to have certain characteristics and those include like either psychological or cultural characteristics coming from certain places. Like, yeah, that's a thing. But to expect someone to stick to that essential category forever and not being able to change their mind about anything, not being able to have personality traits that are different, like you having interests or beliefs that are different from this essentialist category of someone from the Middle East, like that makes you not truly Middle Eastern anymore. That's just gross and discriminatory and I suppose like an internalized form of racism.
And this kind of attitude leads some people to say, you know what, fine, I'm not Middle Eastern anymore. In fact, I don't like people like you because of how you treat me. And they go so far to the other end of the spectrum. I acknowledge the existence of such people, but most of what drives them is that their own quote-unquote community is extremely hostile towards them and shames them for even a little bit of deviation, to the point that they say, well, I'll go and jump into the arms of the people who do accept me, even if they're just using me as a poster child or as a token friend. That sometimes happens, and I'm very aware so that that doesn't happen to me or my followers, but it's not helped by attitudes of people like her. And this kind of attitude also gets people to romanticize the homeland or the motherland or even an Islamic ummah that never existed. And they have a very inaccurate idea of what that actually looks like because of this guilt, because they feel like they're too white or too westernized. I just don't think that a psychologist of all people should be talking this way to remind you that that's her profession.
Oh, God, I can't imagine going to like a marriage and family therapist and person saying, oh, so you're telling me like your kid's a coconut. You need to deal with that. That's a problem. Yikes.
Who do
Wow.
I have to email to get her fired? Like this is not okay.
My advice is to not give these types of people any attention, as they are frauds. They could live their lives privately as non-Muslims and talk about or sell other things online, but they choose to be antagonists and choose to put out negativity about Islam.
As opposed to the positivity that she's spreading about Islam right now. Do you feel any more positive about Islam because of her video?
I don't have a positive impression of her or of her ideology at this point. This has definitely been a negative experience for me on the whole.
And while she can choose to sell anything or talk about anything online, she chooses to talk negatively and use Islam to sell whatever her brand is.
There's so much projection in this video. It's kind of shocking, honestly.
So many glass houses.
I'll end with how to deal with relatives that have become ex-Muslims. Firstly, let them know you're against this. In Islam, we have strict rules of kinship, and Muslims are encouraged not to cut family ties. So if you think you can bring a relative back to Islam, then you should show compassion and try to advise them. And through kindness and your example as a good Muslim, invite them back to Islam. However, if the person has no intention of doing so, then it is best to keep one's distance, as they may negatively influence you and your kids through their lifestyle, behavior, and attitude.
That sounds very familiar to you, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yes, this is an attitude that is pretty common in fundamentalist circles. It's actually one of the reasons I decided to start my channel was because I grew up fundamentalist, but my parents didn't believe this, which made me a kind of rare exception. Someone who is informed about fundamentalist culture and Christianity, but also had the social ability and opportunity to speak about it without completely destroying my life. I just think that shunning someone who doesn't believe, especially a family member, especially a child, has more to do with defending your own ego and defending cultural homogeneity than it has to do with building functional relationships and allowing people to have a good quality of life, especially when it comes to a spouse or a child.
Notice how she sugarcoated and spun that by first emphasizing how Islam talks about kinship and ties and all that kind of stuff, and then immediately negated all that by saying, but if they're not going to believe, just cut them off because, you don't want them influencing you. Again, imagine if I said that kind of rhetoric about Muslims. If you have a person in your life who is Muslim or has become Muslim, try to convince them not to be. And if they won't be convinced, then cut them off. I would never say something like that.
Yeah, I would think that that's a pretty gross and discriminatory thing to say. I would genuinely just be like, dude, why do you really think that having that attitude is actually going to motivate people who are believing to want to question what they think? Or are they going to see you as being bigoted, discriminatory, and unfair? I'd give you a little reality check if you were saying something like that.
We all need a friend like Drew, and I hope that she has a friend like Drew.
I mean, I hope that she would have a friend that might second guess her there, give her a second opinion, but it doesn't sound like her ideology really allows for that. She would have cut them off by now, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But to play devil's advocate here, because she sees apostasy or disbelief as this infectious sort of disease or idea that you have to quarantine from, I understand where she's coming from, but it's almost as if they consciously realize that there is no cure for critical thinking, that if you start questioning, you'll never stop. And some people are actually that self-conscious. They say, I know that if I look into this further, I'm not going to be a believer. I don't know how aware she is of that, but on some level, it seems like they acknowledge that you cannot stop apostasy except using force and coercion.
It's funny to hear you say that because you've gained that perspective from having empathy for her. Like you've put yourself in her shoes to understand why she might think that. And it's great to see that you can do that. I think that that is just a fundamental piece of not being an adult child, of growing up and being well developed and healthy in your relationships, in your personhood. It's not something that she's encouraging people to do, though, even as like a therapist. That is crazy.
I still want to believe that she's not a bad person and she's not doing this because she's wicked, which is the opposite of what she believes about people like me. But you can still be well-meaning, and because of the information that you have, because of your worldview, you end up making very terrible decisions and having bad opinions, and that's what's happening here. That's why it's scary to let people roam free with their ideas about what God said and didn't say, because if they're not checked, if there's not critical thinking involved, if there's not a harm analysis done, then she might get away with thinking that this is how you care for the greater good. She's doing what she's doing because she cares for the people around her, and she doesn't want them getting that infectious disease of apostasy. But if she were to take a zoom out and take a bigger look at what's happening, maybe she'll understand that critical thinking is necessary to arrive at the truth. And if your truth cannot withstand critical thinking, it is not true.
That is a perspective that has an incredible amount of empathy built into it. And you've said something to me just like in private, not on camera before, that has stuck with me. And it's basically that something that gives you hope is that a little bit of critical thinking seems to be enough to de-radicalize people to a certain extent. And you've just said also that critical thinking is almost seen as permanent and infectious for some people. And so that makes me think your perspective is informed by your critical thinking skills, and your critical thinking skills have informed your empathy. And then you've had this kind of vicious cycle between your capacity for empathy and your capacity for critical thought. It gives me a lot of hope to think, at least, that kind of cycle, that vicious cycle that you are like displaying here as a positive thing, that might be infectious and permanent and really difficult to stop. Even after all of this, I have at least a shred of hope that people can be reached in order to have the kind of empathy that you display in your content all the time.
That is all very kind of you to say. I actually forgot that I said any of that, so I should have you follow me around and tell me my best ideas. That would greatly improve my life. But thank you, Drew. That is very thoughtful. I appreciate it. Do you want to finish the video?
All right, yeah.
I don't, but we have to.
Thank you for watching. Make sure to join my free Telegram group via the link in the description, where we as Muslims can speak freely and without censorship about issues like this, and in order to guide and support each other in our deen. And remember to like, subscribe, and become a channel member for access to exclusive content. Until next time, inshallah, Jazakallah khair.
So she does ask people to like, subscribe, and become members and donate.
Yeah, again, the projection has been wild. To end your video where you're accusing someone of being a scam artist for being honest about their opinion with this, that's pretty hilarious, honestly.
Thank you to her for reminding us. Like, subscribe, share, become a member, join Patreon, all that good stuff. Join the community. I have a Discord community. If you want to be a part of that, links are in the description as well. And I want to say a huge thank you to Drew for joining me and for being here, giving his unbiased opinion, as he put it. Drew, any closing thoughts that you have?
Well, I just really appreciate that there are people like you doing this. I'm really glad that your channel exists. When a mutual friend of ours told me that your channel existed and I found it, I went through your content and saw the empathy that you're so consistent in, it was like a huge sigh of relief. It's just when you're in the pressure cooker of apostasy from Islam, when you have people shouting in your ear these kinds of kind of extreme and vitriolic perspectives, and then you have people that are totally outside of the ex-Muslim sphere that are like, oh yeah, like Muslims just suck. It becomes really difficult to fit in with any kind of community, and therefore it becomes very difficult to speak lovingly and empathically to an audience in the way that you're doing. It's hard to set the example that you're setting, and yet you are doing it. So I appreciate you having me on, but I also just appreciate that you are making the content that you're making, because it's not easy to do at all.
I feel very seen, and I appreciate your appreciation. Thank you, Drew. Thank you so much. And I want to tell the audience to go subscribe to his channel if you haven't already. He makes awesome videos. If you'd like to see us react to other videos in the future or collaborate in other ways, let us know in the comments below. There's no shortage of such videos online. Don't forget to support us, because if you do so, you're amplifying our voices over the voices of such hateful people. Thank you to the supporters, patrons, YouTube members, and everybody who's helped me along the way. I could not do this without you. And as always, think critically and think for yourself, and consider watching one of these videos next.